Welcome. This is Lucas Price, and I'm back with you again to learn about building elite sales teams. We talk fairly regularly about hiring on building elite sales teams. Today, we're going to talk about what happens next. Being great at onboarding is critical to a new employee's success and a pillar for building high-performing teams. How do you provide a great onboarding experience? And how is that onboarding experience connected to the hiring process? I'm excited that today we are joined by Barrett King from New Breed to discuss these topics. Barrett is a results-driven leader with over 10 years of experience in building partnerships and executing go-to-market strategies for SaaS companies. He's adept at creating and implementing sales and marketing plans that drive customer engagement and retention, and has a proven track record of exceeding sales targets in delivering results in fast-paced and competitive environment. Barrett is passionate about problem solving and enjoys the ever-changing environment of growth stage companies. Barrett, welcome to Building Elite Sales Team.
Thanks for having me. I'm fired up to be here. It's a heck of an intro. I'm excited to have this conversation. This will be fun.
Yeah, me too. Tell us a little bit about your background, what got you into sales and to sales leadership.
Yeah, so my background's different. I think the way that I like to describe it, in general, is the idea of I articulate it this way. So that green Lego mat we all had as kids, where you like built your ship or your house or whatever on top of. I think about that as the foundation you have when you exit primary education, which for me was a bachelor's of science with a focus in digital design. So nothing like what I actually do for a living, although perhaps there's a correlation there. And when I graduated, the house that I grew up in, I had a mother who was a marital and family therapist. I had a father who was a career salesperson. He was in high tech and had been, certainly I think in many ways, the leader that taught me, what it meant to be a salesperson, right? So he was always really good at his job and cared about it and invested. And so I always saw sales as an avenue. But it was in college that I had a peer at our graduating event say to me, well, something unique. So he had just won this big award for these beautiful art pieces he had created, traditional art. And I'm not an artist. I like to think that I am in my head, but I'm not. I draw like stick figures. And he had created this like photorealistic, just beautiful piece of art. And I'm standing next to him. It's a very pivotal moment in my life. And I look over, his name's Pete. I said, Pete, man, I envy your talent. This is such an incredible piece of work. I'm so proud of you. He's a dear friend. Congratulations. And he looks at me and he goes, you envy me? And I wish I was like you. And I laughed and I went, no, you don't. I can draw stick figures. And he goes, nah, maybe I'm a better, traditional artist. And we kind of giggled. And he said, but your words are your art. Never forget that. And I just remember being like, whoa, I really hadn't thought about my talents and my skills and my abilities in that way. And I carried that forward. And so, I graduated at a time when the market's not doing well. There's not a lot of jobs. So I go into restaurants. And in hindsight, I can look back and say I was starting to place Lego bricks on that mat as I left, sort of primary education and moved into my career. I didn't do it in an organized way. A lot of folks know what they want out of their career. They're very clear on the types of Lego bricks, the sizes, the shapes that they're going to put down. I didn't. I was in restaurants and I was in a tech startup at one point doing some marketing and some events work, back in opening restaurants again. And then I went into an earlier stage tech startup that was selling to restaurants. And so I did a bunch of different things, adding Lego bricks to my mat before I got to HubSpot, where the last 8.5 years prior to where I'm at now, which I'll speak about, is where my career sort of took off and where I started to grow a lot more of the sales specific skills. So even in those startups, I was taking the different Legos, the experiences I had, and leaning into sales as a career. Slightly resistant, frankly, because sales is a highs and lows game, right? And I think for a lot of us, we enjoy the highs and we dread the lows. But ultimately, the more that I embraced the opportunity, the more that I realized sales was exciting and sales was something I was passionate about, and helping people through delivering value is what it became for me. So 8.5 years at HubSpot in partnerships and sales leadership. And now as senior director of revenue at New Breed, I get to work around the HubSpot ecosystem, helping my team to sell value and helping my team to, I think in many ways, sell the solutions to problems that before I could just identify, and now we can actually solve. We can actually do something to impact. So sales has been a journey, and it's obviously going to continue to be one for me. But I think about it in context of having range and depth of my career, and why those different components coming together is ultimately what created this bigger opportunity for me overall.
Yeah. So your words are your art. That sounds like a great gift to get from a friend to share that with you. I've been in leading early stage sales organizations where I felt like a lot of my job was, like product marketing because the company was early stage. Your words are your art. It kind of sounds like it could have taken you into product marketing.
It should have. Yeah, it probably should have. In hindsight, maybe I should have gone that direction. It's definitely interesting.
So you say maybe you should have gone down that route. So I assume that's part of the skill set that you bring to your sales leadership then is helping your sales organizations get the right messaging.
I think it has to be like if you look at the way that sales has evolved, it's not single dimension. So what I mean is like if you go back even like 5 years, if you were a salesperson, you knew the product, you were really good at it, you knew the solution and the discovery and the right sort of aperture to take when you view the problem. But now you need to be an expert at the problem. You need to be an expert at the depth necessary to articulate not just the opportunity, but the way that you're going to achieve the outcome for that customer. You need to, own your brand, right? You need to think about owning not just your own information and the way that sort of do your everyday selling and discovery and the sort of step by step tactical stuff. But the best salespeople own that the solution they provide, you've got a marketing team behind it, but you yourself should be a marketer for your brand. You yourself should own your product and your solution, as an individual. So, anyways, yeah, I do think it's part of what makes a good sales leader because not only am I trying to support the right customers and trying to attract the right customers and engage them, but it's also a talent motion, right? So, like one of the things you saw big tech do really well before the pandemic and very much through it was they capitalized on the idea that inbound and content marketing could apply to talent too. You could market the opportunities around your business. A lot of what I do here at New Breed is around looking to attract the right fit talent to help us help our customers, which requires me to, again, in many ways, product market because the product is our culture, the product is our team and our efforts and the way that we actually go to market. I try and put that out on LinkedIn. I try and communicate that message too. So, anyways, yeah, I mean, I joke and say maybe I should have gone that route. Maybe I'm going that route already, anyways, just with a
Yeah.
sales lens. I'm just fascinated by the industry in that sense.
Well, yeah, communication is key to every job, and and the ability to take the complex and make it simple, I think, is key to every job as well. And so,
100%. Yeah.
so that's definitely a skill set that you have that you're bringing to it. Tell me a bit about the moment or the transition from being a seller to being a sales leader, and why you decided to go that route. As a it's you could in this day and age in technology, you can get a very lucrative job as a seller. And I think sales leadership is a calling for a lot of people. Like, what was it for you
Yeah.
that made you go that route?
I think it's a bit of a calling. It's a good word to use. I mean, for me, I much of my career, and I frankly, like, it was not always intentional. Maybe sometimes it's intentional, but genuinely, I believe that like part of what makes me feel fulfilled as a person, what makes me feel good, is helping others. That sounds like a very kind of fluffy answer, but it's true for me. I get energy from those interactions. So a lot of my career was, in some ways, sort of dotted with these moments where I helped a peer sell a deal. I helped, a colleague overcome a challenge. And then it started to evolve as I got more mature in my tenure and in my own skill set. And then it was helping managers get better at managing. And I remember being in this team lead program at one point, and I was in the inaugural group, and we sat in the room, and sort of everyone said, "Well, what do you want to get from this?" I just remember saying, like, "I just want to help people." And they were like, "Oh, you're in the wrong career. Like, it's not always about helping people. You got to drive revenue, you got to grow." And I just remember being like, "Yeah, I get that. Like, that's sort of table stakes part of it, but I really just want to help people be better, help people learn, help people grow in the way that they sort of, in many ways, get to the places they want to be." So I think for me, a lot of it's that. I will not forever be a sales leader. I enjoy it and I will do it as long as I am helping people and I am growing myself in the way that I want to. I'll be an IC again. I like being an IC. It's fun. It's fun work with the customers. It's fun controlling your fate. But there's something special about, especially at the elevated level, you can get to as you progress through leadership, the impact starts to grow. And so while IC is great because it impacts your wallet perhaps and you control your time and whatnot, there's also some downside to that too. And we could certainly speak to it. As a leader, though, the width of your impact, like the depth of your impact, starts to actually increase because there's more people, there's more trust, and there's certainly potentially at least more experience that you bring to those interactions each time.
Yeah. You've had all this success in sales and sales leadership. What in your background gave you the drive to find this level of success?
It's such a good question. So what's interesting about that is I've started to reflect on this more. So when I don't know if I've ever said this on a recording before. I'm going to say it here for you. So throughout high school, I was sort of neutral. I describe it like this is like a very 90s statement. I'm 39 years old. So like high school graduation was 2003 for time reference for listeners, right?
Yeah.
There were the jocks and there were the cheerleaders and there were the like nerds and there were the kind of classic, you do joke about it, but like those categories of people that we bucketed our peers into. And then there was Barrett, who's like sort of in the middle of it all. I didn't really think of anybody by a category. I liked people that were good people and that was it. And I didn't actually have a huge work ethic. I was, I think in some ways, perhaps just intelligent enough or aware enough or whatever you would call it that I could do fine and get B's. Like I didn't have to work that hard and I could get B's. And so from a grade perspective, that sufficed. Like no one really pushed anybody in the 90s and early 2000s. Like you just sort of existed the way you did. And so for me, I go to college and I go to one school, I go to state school here and I do some stuff and then I don't really love it. And I go back for my second semester and I like it even less. I go back for year two and I hate it. And so I take a leave of absence. And I remember my parents being like, "Are you quitting school?" I said, "No, I'm not quitting school." And they're like, "Well, it feels like it. You're giving up." No, I'm just going to figure out what I want to do. And I went for a year and I worked a, kind of standard blue collar job in an office, if you will. Actually, it was like a custom truck shop, to be candid. And I just remember in those experiences thinking like, well, I don't want to do this. I know that. And so part of it was the like neutral attitude that was feeding this. And it wasn't until I had that year where I worked what was like potentially my life if I didn't go back to school and get a degree, kind of a manual labor job and realizing, to be clear, anyone that does that, I admire now as an adult because there's something incredibly beautiful about working with your hands and your body to achieve something. But at the time, every person around me just kept saying, but you got to go back to school. You got to go back to school. And so I went back to school and found a place in Florida and I moved down there. And this was the defining moment for me. I moved to Florida. It's like I apply to this college. I get accepted 2 weeks later. I tell my parents, I fly down 2 weeks after that and look at an apartment. And 2 weeks later, I quit my job and I moved my life to Florida. So in 6 weeks, I went from what am I doing with my life to I'm now living here and I'm living by myself and I'm like 3,000 miles away from everyone I've ever known. That was an important catalyst for me as a human being because I had to learn to be very self reliant, independent, and figure out how to exist in the world. But it was actually moving back home and working in restaurants that gave me the work ethic. So what's fascinating is, and I believe this, I've reflected on this quite a bit. The early career for me, so the early education and the early life stuff was important to defining independence. And you add in this idea of restaurant culture, which is like hospitality is intense and sometimes very brutal and very, maddening, but very much team oriented and, about the collective and just oriented on this idea of like, if you work hard, it's just enough. Like there was no the hardest worker didn't win anything more. They were just seen as like a good employee. And so I just developed this insatiable appetite to do more, to work harder, to achieve more. And then I worked in startups. So you took like this crazy intense restaurant world of 3 p.m. to 3 a.m. and the madness that is hospitality, the beauty in that, I think that I really found. And then you apply it to startups where it's hustle grind culture. This is like mid 2000s now. So every funded startup talks about grind and hustle and work harder and do more and multiple hats and all these fun buzzwords. And so I just carried that into the, career jobs I leaned into at that point. And then it went into, the tech company I joined. HubSpot was 400 people when I joined, gosh, almost 10 years ago now, and grew to 8,000 employees while I was there. So with that level of growth, it's hustle, it's grind, it's work hard, and it's achieve. And I think, for me, it's just at this point ingrained in my DNA.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, we talked about this before the show, but, lots of differences in our backgrounds, but also some, sort of striking similarities. And the
Yeah.
way you described your high school experience was, well, I played all the sports, but I didn't feel like I was one of the athletes socially. I felt like I was, liked by everyone and sort of a connector between all the different groups, right? And didn't really belong to any of them. So striking, another similarity that we talked about before. As I listen to you talk about all this, the other thing that strikes me is that you're very thoughtful and perhaps as a leader, you want to get to the right answer and help people get to the right answer. And sometimes in startup culture, there's a saying that's escaping me now where it's more about like making a decision, but making the right decision. But like
Yeah.
I think a lot of it strikes me that you probably you're not going to get stuck in indecision, but you want to spend some time to think through it and get to the right decision. Do I have that right? And if so, how has that, helped you or affected you as a leader?
I try. I don't do it well all the time. My superpowers I've identified are, I think, a little bit different than some of my peers that are in this role. So
Mm,
I tend to find that I think really fast. I'm really good at pattern recognition. And I think Einstein said something about like intelligence is just being able to do those two things well. Like it's repetition, pattern recognition, and being able to I tend to think really quickly like I described. So maybe it's a matter of I'm mindful because I'm moving fast, but I also think that the important maybe inflection point in the way that startups have grown has changed. So I think about like my time in the startups I was at, earlier on in my career. It was what you're describing. Indecision is the death of innovation and growth, some version of that. And so perhaps I learned just to do it. Well, maybe even actually now I'm reflecting out loud, but maybe it was the restaurant thing. There's no time to stop and think. You got to seat the guests, clear the table, start the party, serve the food. It gets cold. Like there's all these speed-based oriented, excuse me, motions in that space already. And then you go to startups where, the culture is that and will sort of forever be that, I think, in many ways. At New Breed, we're fortunate to be at a growth stage. So we're not startup. We've been in business for 15 years or so. We're 120 people or so, 15, 20 people now at this point. So, we're not tiny, but we're growing and we're growing very systematically. We're self-funded, which means like we don't have PE barking over our shoulders saying, do more, go faster, et cetera. And so I think perhaps I'm a product of my environment in many ways in the way that I make decisions. I'm fortunate here that I get to be more intentional, more mindful. And again, while I'm imperfect, I don't do that all the time. Sometimes I move too fast. And I'm sure there's times I don't move fast enough. I think if you look at it from a median sort of average perspective, it matters because ultimately the decisions that we're making they impact people, right? I remember I had a peer early in my career say, this software we were selling, this software fundamentally changes people's lives. And then later in my career, someone said, you got to fall madly in love with the problem about a tech that we were selling. And I combine those thoughts quite often in my head to the idea of like, well, the work that we're doing, in particular at Newbury, where I am now, we, unlock meaningful growth for our customers. Those customers are sometimes it's a SaaS company doing something cool, and that's great. It's an AI firm, it's an innovative this or that. Sometimes they're like, we had a company at one point that was turning microplastics back into fuel for like the sort of recycling system that was already in place in a part of the world. I'll keep it kind of neutral to not identify them. Fascinating, right? Like, and that has meaningful impact on more than just their company's net profits. And so I think for
Mhm.
me, again, there's an awesome responsibility that comes with leadership because it's about the customer, it's about the business that you're a part of, and it's about the people whose lives you impact. And so very long-winded answer, forgive me, but I am very passionate about trying to get that right because I have this like awesome sense of ownership and responsibility over the fact that a lot of these decisions have not just a single point of impact, but significant ripples thereafter.
So we talked before recording here about how one of the pillars, one of the things you've really spent a lot of time and effort on getting great at is the onboarding process. Like that's how, part of what's made you successful as a sales leader. Can you tell us, kind of give us an overview? Tell us a little bit about how you discovered the importance of that and the impact that you've seen it have?
Failure, like lots of failure. I think when you look at organizations that don't have a intentional way of helping people become successful, like you used to hear it a lot, you still do actually, the idea of like sink or swim. Oh, you're great. We hired you because you're great. Go figure it out. I actually worked at
Yeah.
a company once. They called it the figure it out factor. They literally said, we're not going to help you. Go figure it out. And when in the moment, I'm like, yeah, I'm going to work hard. That's that grind attitude, right? I'm gonna get there and I'm gonna make it work. And then, as a perhaps adult at this point and as a leader myself, I look back and go, that doesn't seem very smart. Like you invested all of this CAC in acquiring somebody who you believe is going to be successful. Why not empower them to their fullest ability to be successful and get as much value back out of that investment as possible? And so I think, for me, it was watching people fail and it was myself at times failing. And because the system was missing, seeking it out, wanting it. And I think part of it is I was fortunate to be the first head of partner sales training at HubSpot, and then ultimately own part of the direct sales training responsibility, and then the sort of whole training module for a period of time around sales. And what I learned was the importance of how people learn, the impact of the way information is delivered, that there is a difference between training and coaching, all of these methodologies. So perhaps I'm like this lesson soup in my head at this point, this amalgamation of all these different concepts. But I think fundamentally, when you look at what you're trying to do when you grow an organization, you have to disconnect headcount from growth at some point. And so earlier on, if you can be intentional around building assets and pathways and frameworks to empower, and then I think in many ways try and systematize that to make it scalable, then imagine a world where every new hire was a predictable numerical impact on your business. And so I think about it in maybe three ways. One is like the front end LTV to CAC ratios of acquiring a new employee and trying to make them successful. The two is the material impact of doing that sooner than later from a financial perspective, but also the human impact, which is the part I care most about, my perhaps third pillar in this example, wherein this person is committing to, a portion of their life to work with you, and they're investing their time that they could be spent doing anything else with you. And so it's your awesome responsibility and opportunity to be intentional around helping them to be successful.
Lots of great points there. Couple that I want to go down. I
Sure.
think early on when an employee is brand new, like being hyper engaged with them, I think can do so much to get them on the right track and really like sink or swim. Maybe some people will swim, but it'll probably take them a lot longer to start swimming than it could otherwise. And so you're wasting a
Right.
lot of time in terms of ramping and stuff like that. But you talked about the way people learn, like, and understanding how people learn. What are some of the things about that that have like affected the way you deliver training or the way you engage with a new seller?
I try pretty hard to assume that most people don't know how they learn, because then it lets me learn how they learn. And I ask the question early, like, how do you best learn? And most folks go, I don't know. I never thought about that. Like, cool. Well, like, how do you take in information? You better if you read it? If you better if you like hear somebody say it to you? Is it better if you watch a video? And then most folks from that point can tell you, what it is that they're like looking for, what they're best at. I think the interesting point around being aware of it is that, and I like this is genuine. I mean this. Like, I would love if I had resources every place I've ever worked and ever will work that I could dedicate to having do this full time. Like the companies that have L&D teams that they invest in are smart, because those are instructional designers and educators that understand that there is a differentiated way that every person consumes information. Like, let's be real here, at our core, we're machines. And if we don't figure out how the machine takes in data, that's kind of a problem. And so it's changed the way that I interact with my peers. It's in the way that I interact with the folks that work, around me. And feels weird to say for me, but I guess in some ways they are. And so, when I think about the team that I get the chance to work with every day here, and I have in other jobs, in other roles, it's important because, you could be a capitalist and say like, well, it costs me more money if I screw it up. Cool. That could be your motivator, right? Like if you don't think about the way that people learn, if you don't lean into the idea that information is consumed differently, then you're just going to throw stuff at somebody and hope it works. And when it doesn't, it's going to cost you more money. So there's your capitalist version, right? Then there's like the overly indexed on human part, which is like it's unfair to the person. So if I show up and I assume that every time I interact with you, you can hear me when I talk at you like this, right? Like I know many a one-on-one I've sat in and have been like, what did that person say? I just tuned out. I got tired of hearing their voice, right? There is a world in which you could over index and be like, it's not fair to the people. It doesn't help the people. It's about the people. Well, what if you combine both and you say, like, look, if I don't actively try and adapt some of the stuff that I do, not everything, let's be real here, but some of the ways that I share or teach or educate or support or transfer information, and be conscious of the fact that it's not easy for everyone to learn off of a deck that I email, or everyone can't consume a Slack message quickly or whatever it is. So it's a little bit people and then its impact. Well, if I don't adapt to the human need, then it impacts our financial standing. So there's the capitalism part of it. Okay, fine. Let's meet in the middle. Let me get better at transferring information, which yields better employee experience, which helps them be successful sooner, which helps us grow our business more effectively.
So I read something recently. I can't remember for sure where I read it, but I think it might have been Adam Grant's most recent book. But it talked about the idea that I'm curious to have you respond to this. It talked about the idea that learning styles are a little bit of a myth, and that when someone says, I'm an auditory learner, as an example, what that usually means is that they like listening to books or like listening to podcasts or whatever, but they don't actually learn better that way. That in studies, people learn better by reading than by listening. Even the people who think that they learn better by listening actually learn better by reading. And that the learning style is more of like what you enjoy doing versus what the way that you better learn. Have you heard these ideas? Have you come across this or experienced
Yeah.
this at all?
Yeah. Yeah, I experienced and heard it, right? And like I think I actually read the article you're talking about, and it is Adam Grant, I believe. But the here's the interesting part about it, right? So I asked the question to be intentional, and I'm mindful of it to be intentional around the fact that we're all a little different here, right? In the world, like we're all a little different. But the truth is, and to your point, is an interesting question. Does learning style matter? Or does the fact that the person leans into that style matter? And it's for me, it's the second part of that. So like the person we're describing that says, oh gosh, I do really well when I get, auditory based. Could you just record what you're going to send to me instead of emailing me? And I go, yeah, sure. And I take 9 seconds on my phone and I record a voice message and I Slack it over to the person, or I use the UI and do it that way. And they go, oh, so great. I just listened to that on the way to go pick up my kids. And you're like, so really you just didn't want to text and drive or email and drive, or cool. Like that's fair. Right. Or the person that says, "Can you call me? I do better if you can just call me and talk to me about it." The truth is, it's about being accommodating of how the person leans in the most to consuming the information. So maybe they don't learn from a developmental and computational perspective as well. To your point, they don't retain perhaps all the words as well as they might reading it, for example's sake. But frankly, if Bill or Sally in this example, right? Whoever this person is leans into the idea of consuming information that way, then fine. Maybe they don't retain as much to the point of like a test standard, but I get better employee engagement and they feel more fulfilled or more heard or, have a better experience. Still a win for me because it means they'll show up the next time. So, at its core, if I'll use myself, like I consume information at a high rate of speed, I can read it, I can hear it, and I can converse on it. I enjoy conversing most. I can consume it through reading probably the most effectively, and I least enjoy just listening. I'm aware of that, right? So I index towards like, let's hop on a quick phone call, let's jump on a quick Zoom. Some of my peers don't love that, and that's okay too. In any event, I know that if you say to me and become the person that calls me, like I've had, folks that just they do it to me still. Like they'll just call my cell phone. They want to ask me something, they call my cell phone. I'm like, well, why wouldn't you Slack me? Well, I just want to call you. Fine. Then I know when you call, I'll pick up. It'll take 3 minutes, but you'll get what you need and you'll move on. Those behaviors that we develop are habit loops, right? Charles Duhigg has that book, The Power of Habit. He talks about how we have a habit loop. There's a trigger, there's a behavior, and there's a reward. If the reward is that the person for you, for this teacher, if you will, this trainer, this instance, the reward is that that person is more engaged or that person gets you the results that you're looking for. And the trigger is I need to transfer information. Who cares what the habit loop is? I don't care if they need to listen to me versus read for me. Like if it helps us become better, I'm all in.
Pivoting a little bit here, but you're onboarding some new sellers, some new employees in the sales organization. How does what you learned during the hiring process about those sellers affect the onboarding plan?
Yeah. So we have a rubric that we developed that looks at core attributes for success. And there is a rating scale. The new hires are aware of it, but it's a little bit of like a pass fail. I mean, there's numbers, but it's more of a pass fail in that sense. However, we do identify, we try to at least, we aim to, the characteristics of that individual through their interview that would certainly impact the way they go through an onboarding and through an ongoing training process. So this is really great new hire we had recently. And in their new hire presentation, they crafted this is so cool. They crafted a presentation using our brand that we were convinced someone had given them, like our slides. It wasn't perfect, but it felt, looked it. It was our logo. It was our color scheme. It was even our, we think it was our font and it was our layout and like our flow. So afterwards we asked, we said to this person, like, did you get this from somebody? I said, no, I looked on the internet. I couldn't find any of your assets anywhere. You guys don't really have any presentations sitting out there, which wouldn't really have a reason to. So they went to our website, consumed a bunch of our content, kind of internalized our brand voice and created this asset. We're like,
Mm.
wow, that's cool. Like great standout in the interview process, but like crassly put, holy shit. Like that's kind of a wow moment. That's brilliant. And now
Yeah.
they're in their onboarding and they're doing a really good job of learning from their peers and listening to calls. And just the other day came to me and said, hey, I figured out how to get us in on some new uncontested RFP opportunities. Like, what? Where did you find this? Oh, and it's that entrepreneurial attitude, this spirit of like, I'm going to go figure something out. So now what I do is like, whenever I can, and I'm talking to this person, I try and present ideas that I'm thinking about, or I elicit ideas from them. And that's all because I'm realizing that they're a creative thinker, they're a hard worker, and they're also like a little bit different in the way that they approach problems. And I love that, right? Diverse thinking is really important to me as a leader. So while I don't always try and say I have to adapt perhaps to a learning style, like frankly, I don't have L&D team members. It's myself and some of the team members that work, with me, a peer manager that I have that works with me, and some folks in our RevOps team. And like, it's an SME-led process. And I do try and adapt the content where I can. A lot of it's about communication style. It's usually the thing that I take the most from an interview process is how do they interact with me and fellow leaders? How do they interact with their peers? And how can we be adaptive, intentional, and deliberate around the way that we sort of go to market with them, right? How do we empower them to be the best way that the best version of themselves in the way that they can most effectively do that? And that is again informed by this idea of like carrying through their experience and beyond all the insights we gleaned from early and first conversations.
Yeah. So it sounds like in this instance, you're getting to know people on an individual basis. You're trying to have those one-on-one conversations to get the best out of them. At the same time, you have a program that you're putting them through as well.
Correct. Yep.
And so, how do you make sure that you have the right balance of like, hey, everyone is going to do this. And, there are these extra things or these other things that I think would be best for this
Yeah,
individual.
that's a good one, actually. I don't think perhaps very actively about that. When I describe thinking for myself, a lot of it's passive thinking. It happens. That's what you described it earlier of like, do you think and then act, or you just sort of just act on it? I'm not sure that I always sit down and think about how we would adapt our onboarding because we've tried to be, and I've done this like here and actually many of the companies I've been a part of. Onboarding should be a combination of foundational knowledge, the table stakes stuff that it entails in terms of being successful, and then additive value. Because if you think about like the average new hire, they join your business, they are still whatever version of themselves they are coming from, like whatever that company was, industry, company, other role. I actually talked to my team a lot about this, which is like go to LinkedIn, look at somebody's LinkedIn, and unless they've been in their role more than 2 years, they are still the persona of who they were before that. So, like, I love when someone says, well, it's the CMO on the call. And I'm like, cool. That person is probably more like a director of marketing in terms of experience. They've been in the role for 8 months, right? Same thing's true for new hires. You have to unlearn a lot of the stuff, not always bad, not always good, just the stuff that they've spent time consuming prior to. That's the foundational part of onboarding. I don't change that. Like, for the most part, that stuff is just tables. How do you create a quote? What is the entry and exit criteria of a discovery call? How do you discount? Like, those are the foundational skills. The art, if you will, so now we're moving beyond the science. The art comes in when you start to look at the extra stuff. So for right now, like live, and this is what are we, April, end of April 2024, right? Two of my new hires, soon to be a third, get an hour a week with myself and a manager that works with me. Do essentially an open session, if you will. It's not a Q&A. We bring topics, but it's training. It's developmental. It's meant to help them get better, but it's ad hoc. It's not in a program. We don't have it, in a curriculum. It is recorded so we can share it with other people. But like just this week, we talked about let's do the fundamental new breed pitch again. Let's really nail down the foundation of what that sounds like. That's a little bit of table stakes. And then it was, all right, we're going to throw different questions at you live, Barrett. We want to hear the sort of next best question, an exercise I love running. And so we played a game of like essentially, how do we learn on the things we've already learned, entry and exit criteria, foundational discovery questions, et cetera. How do we learn to get more creative, more artistic? How do we get more flexible in our process? It's not on a curriculum. It's not on a playbook somewhere. It's just human beings being people. And so for me, it was a combination of taking what these two new hires had done in their earlier, in the first couple of weeks of their job, plus in their interviews, and saying, team, would this feel good? It wasn't my idea, to be clear, but the manager that works with me came up with it, and it was absolutely brilliant. And so now we do this session that is ad hoc and natural and free, and it matters. It helps because then they learn organically and they benefit from it.
Yeah, that's great. What if someone's thinking about their onboarding program, building an onboarding program, what are common mistakes that get made that they should make sure to avoid?
It's too much too soon. And that's true in every onboarding program right now. I think we're moving faster than we ever have as a species. That sounds very scientific. I just mean like as people, we're taking too many inputs right now. You've got social media, you've got notification overload with Slack and email and every other platform on your phone. You've got all of this stuff coming at you. And then you're like, cool, we're going to help you to like unlearn a bunch of stuff, relearn a bunch of new stuff. So volume, first and foremost is volume. Um, the second part that I think is really important is context. So, like, at the risk of sounding like a pretentious jerk, you're not as smart as you think you are, Mr. and Mrs. Leader. Like, I guarantee you are not. And why I say that is like you are smart because you have perspective, you have exposure, you have experience. And so I'm using smart as a general term. Like, we come in with this ego to onboarding of like, I'm going to teach you everything I know. No, you're not. Time will do that. What you should do is give them the tools to learn really effectively in the framework of your organization. So what I do, and I really like this, is the buddy system. I used to pair people up. I'd say, all right, new hire, you're with so-and-so, my most tenured rep. That's old school thinking though. That tenured rep is old school. They've been at your business for 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, whatever. That's fine, but their process probably is not best practices anymore. It's probably not your standard process you're trying to evolve to. What I encourage is your peer mentors are your team. I'm going to ask you in every of your first, 5 to 10 one-on-ones, who you've been working with this week, who are you learning from? And what I tell all of them, it's the same thing I tell new parents. I'm a dad, right? And so they say, new parents go, well, what's the best advice you can give me? And I'm like, everyone's going to give you advice. Your job is to hear everyone and listen to no one, right? That's my like new baby advice. Same thing's true for salespeople. Same thing's true for new leaders. Everyone's going to say, well, what I did and what I do and what you should do, take it all in but then formulate your own process. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't be within the guardrails, right? The expectations that you set in your onboarding. You need to run a discovery call. You need to ask, and get this kind of criteria, et cetera. But the more effective you can be at early on guardrails and not step by step, I think for the modern salesperson, they're going to be more effective at actually learning how to learn in the frameworks of what your organization does. And the last piece, be patient. Gosh, we need to be more patient. We are so worried about time to value and so worried about ramping successfully. And like one of my new hires right now is at like 250% in their second month, just crushing it. The other one already created two opportunities and they're in their second week. Great. But there's that old adage, and I'm going to get this wrong. I have to think of what it is. Actually, it's going to bug me now. There's a farmer, and someone comes to his farm, and they say like, "Your horse got loose, and aren't you worried about that?" And he's like, "We'll see." And then his son comes home, and he says, "Dad, the horse was downtown. What do I do?" And he's like, "Well, we could go find it." And the son's like, "We got to go right now." And he's like, "Well, let's take our time and have dinner first, and then we'll go downtown." He goes, "Well, aren't you worried it's going to get dark and the horse is going to get lost?" And he goes, "No, we'll see." And so it goes on and on in this story. It's actually a kid's something. And at one point, the son goes out and the son gets hurt. They like, he breaks his ankle or bumps his foot or whatever it is. And the next day, the army comes to the farm and they're conscripting people. They're going to bring them off to war or whatever. Again, I told you it's an old adage here, right? And the military guy, folks or whatever say, "Oh, we can't take your son. He's got a bad foot." And then the neighbors come over the next day and they say, "Oh, isn't that great? Like, your son couldn't go to war because his foot was broken." And the farmer says, "Well, we'll see." And the whole idea of this whole thing, I did not do it justice. I hope somebody hears this and goes, "You're wrong, Barrett," and DMs me on LinkedIn and gives me the actual article. The whole point is like, we will see. So we get so caught up in this idea of like, you're going to be at this milestone and hit this KPI and hit this metric. And that's all well and good. But we have to remember we are people. It's about helping people be the best version of themselves in your organization. So that requires patience and energy and a willingness to say, we'll see, let it happen and let it manifest and let it exist and then make your decisions.
Yeah. I love that. So many of the great salespeople out there, when you really dig in and start to hear their story, you see that they struggled early on in their career,
Oh,
oftentimes.
yeah. Yep.
It's not that, very few was their instant success. And so that those early struggles don't necessarily tell us everything about who an employee is going to be. And so, yeah, that I love the patience and the we'll see. Start to wrap us up here, Barrett. When you think about our conversation today, any key takeaways that you'd leave our listeners with?
Yeah, I think it's important to be intentional. So if I think about our conversation in retrospect and sort of at 30,000 feet, it's easy to be assumptive and it's easy to think about 6 months down the road and 6 weeks down the road. And like, let's try and be present. Let's try and be more intentional. Let's try and focus on controlling the controllables and be more framework oriented, be more guardrail oriented, be mindful and listen more. I always talk about active listening is the act of listening, but with the intent to understand. Look to understand your new hires. Look to understand, the folks that work with you, because the more you understand them, what motivates them, how they succeed, how they feel good, the more successful you're going to be. We don't all need to sing kumbaya and like sit by the fire and roast a marshmallow, but we have to remember that a big portion of our lives are spent at work right now, and in the the way that we have to operate. And so in that case, let's be intentional. Let's care a little bit more. Let's feel a little bit more. And I think if you bring all of that attitude to your work as a sales leader, as a professional, we're gonna have a better workforce and certainly a better world because of it.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you sharing your story with us, the work ethic that you got from being in a restaurant and then how you were able to bring that in the professional world and into the startup world. And I think you left us with some great lessons around like considering the way people learn and where we can meet them and not giving them too much too soon and having the right level of
Yep.
patience in terms of onboarding people. So appreciate you sharing all that with us today. Where can people find you online?
I'm a LinkedIn guy. So connect with me on LinkedIn. I say yes to 98% of people, unless you're that person that adds me, immediately DMs me and tries to sell me some shit. That drives me crazy. I will block you right away. But I'm here to help. Like I'll spend 15 minutes with anybody that I can help, even if it's just a back and forth on LinkedIn or an email or otherwise. I also have my own show called Outcomes. It's partnerships and SaaS. So I talk with go-to-market leaders who are in many ways, I think, trying to grow their organizations around the conversation we had. How do we be more effective, more invested, more intentional in the way that we go to market? It's micro, it's small, it's 20 minutes, it's tactical. So you can find me on Spotify, Apple, all those places. But At its core, it's LinkedIn. Come connect with me. I'm glad to have a chat.
That's great. Thanks, Barrett. And for our listeners, if you enjoyed this episode of Building Elite Sales Teams, please leave us a review in your podcast app. You can find more of our content online at yardstick.team. And if you have any feedback for us, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. Thank you for joining us again.